All right, so are we ready to kick off, sir?
Ah, yeah.
Here
Yes.
we go. Paul is counting down the days.
It's only half.
It's like, when is my holiday going to come back and get a break from Glad State of Play and Richard's rants? Hello and welcome. My name is Richard Simon. I am Cloud Therapist. This is the May 2025 episode of Cloud State of Play. Again, I have the admirable Paul Bevan with me. Paul is the Director of Infrastructure Research at Bloor Research. So let's kick off and say hello to Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just a bit worried that you're working backwards through the dictionary for my adjectives and that you've got to A, so I don't know what you're going to say next time. But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
lovely,
Double A, AZ, I don't know, something like that. We'll
lovely.
have to drop some of those through ChatGPT and see what it comes up with, maybe.
Anyway, lovely to talk to you again.
Indeed. So yeah, welcome back in. We have hopefully one more episode with you, the June episode, and then you're going to be off on holiday and kind of be free from the shackles of Cloud State of Play for a couple of months.
Yeah. I'm taking a brief. I would say can't even say it's sabbatical. I'm just going on holiday.
Yes, just going on holiday. Yeah. Not too far from the orbit of Cloud Therapist and Cloud State of Play. Well, I appreciate you coming back in again, as always. Yeah, very much appreciate your insights and opinions on all these things. I think it's always great to have you on. So our topics, I really forgot about our topics for today. So we have three more topics for you as usual. First one is the IT Shills and Access Media. I think Paul and I are going to have some fun with that one. I'm personally sick and tired of the shills and the access media in the IT space. And I think it's time to maybe do a bit of a wake-up call, or I don't know, shine a light on certain dark areas of the industry. So that's the first topic. Second topic is a McKinsey report called Open Source Tech in the Age of GenAI, or I think they call it AI, but I call it GenAI. So that's going to be interesting. That's talking about GenAI models, essentially, that are open sourced. And then the third one is the FinOps report 2025 from the FinOps Foundation. So that's all about cost management and various other things. And we're going to go through that, Paul and I, as well. So, Paul, let's kick off with our first topic. So, IT shills and access media. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting a bit sick and tired of all the sort of the media shills and people who are just really reiterating, regurgitating press releases from vendors and global system integrators, consultancies, and and even some of these kind of higher echelons of the sort of the IT media. So it just seems to be kind of drifting. A lot of them kind of just drift wherever the wind blows, essentially. And the kind of things that I'm seeing, or some of them kind of seem to have, I don't know, a dislike, shall we say, for certain parts of the industry, like hyperscalers. It's not really a kind of a, they don't seem to have a single word, good word to say about, hyperscalers and public cloud and so on. A lot of kind of hating going on with lots of unsubstantiated, sort of information or opinions on things like, cloud repatriation stories and things like that. I've also read things about why enterprises are abandoning public clouds, the rise of independent cloud providers, which you and I have spoken about in the past, is kind of smaller CSPs. And then all of a sudden, they get invited to one of the hyperscalers' big events of the year, and suddenly, woo, the whole attitude has changed. All subsequent posts are, at least neutral, if not nice, to the hyperscalers. And then all of a sudden, it's the enterprise's fault. It's you guys who are not using the public cloud properly. You guys out there not using the public cloud properly, which is why, the public cloud is where it is today. Now, we won't necessarily mention any names for any evidence for all of this, guys. Dear audience, check out the description of this video and you'll see what we mean by that. Paul, what's your take on it?
Oh, God. Well, to an extent, I looked at this and had a real long think about it and think, actually, a lot to blame of this is the consumerization of IT, which has been going on since the early 2000s. Yeah, because what you're getting in, particularly with places like LinkedIn, but YouTube to a certain extent, is that, you've got people thinking they can become influencers and earn money from it. And earn money from it, and therefore, flooding the, whether it's LinkedIn or the internet in general with, as you say, fairly unsubstantiated claims. So, to an extent, we've brought it on ourselves in the sense that we've given credence to the idea of influencers almost as a career.
Yeah.
But have taken the model as the business to consumer model, not the business to business model.
Yeah.
So one of my problem is that, well, I say problem, I wonder whether they're having any influence at all. Because actually enterprises make decisions in very different ways than consumers do. I mean, There are elements of crossover. Of course, there are elements of, we're all human and we've got our likes and dislikes. But, B2B is a very different beast in terms of making a decision, than B2C.
Yes.
And so you've got a model that is effectively most effective in B2C, being used by B2B environments from people who think they can make money out of it. And so my question is anybody making money? And if they are, it's an awful lot of work to get there.
Yes,
but
exactly.
You're right. There is an awful lot of stuff out there. And of course, ChatGPT is actually not helping because a lot of it is just straight ChatGPT that you're hearing.
Copy and pasting. Yes, exactly. So you're absolutely right about the influences kind of for on the enterprise side, not the consumer side of IT and tech and that kind of B2B. And you may recall we had a conversation, I think we actually made it one of our topics from Class Data Play last year, where we talked about, there was an article that was written by some obscure journalist and online outlet. It was blaming the CrowdStrike outage on public cloud. You remember that? And it said, public cloud must really do better than this when it comes to outages. And I was thinking, what's that got to do with it? Public cloud's got nothing to do with. In fact, public cloud would have been a savior for the CrowdStrike outage had people done more, things like VDI, for example, and and kind of dumbed down their end user computing. And then you may recall that one of those so-called influencers echoed that report as well in their own post as well. Again, there'll be more evidence on this in the description of the video, which I just thought was utterly ridiculous because the article itself was, incorrect, non-factual in any of the stuff that it stated about public cloud. And I think you and I went back and forth on it, quite a bit in terms of kind of, outing the actual content.
Yeah, it was important, to get, and for businesses, it was important. A CrowdStrike one was important that you got to the core of why that was an issue. And we talked about the fact that, access to the kernel and what happens when that happens, all those sort of issues.
Yeah.
And so to, make it such a high level, almost scare story, not help business get it, make sure that they do the right things on this. So, I think, we've all benefited probably from the consumerization of IT, but this is one of the downsides. It really is one of the downsides. It's interesting for me as an analyst because we live in a slightly difficult world in the sense that, we're giving our analysis of what's going on, but quite a lot of it is sponsored. Yeah, and we have a very fixed process at Bloor for the way in which we move from initial sort of briefing through to, are we going to write something for these guys? You know, otherwise you do end up doing what you've been talking about, which is as soon as somebody pays you're very nice to them. We actually go through and decide that if it's no good, if the product is awful, we're not going to take the sponsorship, because there's no point taking the sponsorship and then dissing the product. I mean, that's ridiculous. So our blogs might say that there's problems here, there's problems there, but if we write a report that's supported, we've been through a process that says actually what they're talking about, can they back it up? Have they got evidence? Is it something we think is worthwhile looking at? And that takes time, and that's one of the problems you get in this world. You're, as an influencer, you haven't got the time to do it because you need the eyeballs, to give you any chance of getting money. And so I think it's a broken process at the moment. So I absolutely agree with you that there's so much going down there, but the plus side is, are any enterprises actually listening?
Well, I mean, maybe we need a survey on that.
Well, I did one back in about 2003, 2004. At the time, I was responsible for all analyst relations across Europe for Unisys, and getting people to take analysts seriously was one thing. But obviously, if you're going to spend money, why the hell spend it on the analysts? So I went to a respected AR agency that was working with the University of Edinburgh, and got a really useful report at the time that says, in a business-to-business environment, how do businesses make decisions, and where does influence come in? And for the analysts, we found that they were probably one of the most important influencers at the point where you're trying to build a long list or a short list. So they just use it as a filter. But when you get into the process on real projects, the analyst influence dropped to almost zeros, and others came in. And we could spend time going on, but but yes, we did. I actually went and got a survey done.
So I mean, I think my sort of contention point with it is that as you said, I think these influencers are really in it to make money out of it. It's kind of a revenue stream. For them, it's not passive, I would say, but certainly a revenue stream. And some of them are actually treating it as a business. There's certain YouTube channels that essentially regurgitate the press release from an open source vendor or somebody. They bring on the marketing manager or the field CTO from that company or something, and they go back and forth, most likely on pre-scripted, pre-arranged, pre-provided questions, so kind of well oiled and organized questions, and then they just kind of do a 5-minute interview, and that's it, you're done. And I see this also being carried into the live events as well. So when we were kind of live streaming at the AWS Summit in London a few weeks ago. Check that out. That's available on the channel, by the way, guys. I could see a lot of that kind of thing happening. There's a lot of people sitting down with cameras and lights on and things like that. And, they were being interviewed by some of these kind of more established, IT and sort of TV, if you like, or YouTube, LinkedIn outlets that essentially do that. And that's fine if you're kind of going to have a very sort of open conversation, push back a little bit maybe, and so on. But unfortunately, I think all of them are pre-arranged, and the questions. These are the questions you're going to ask. This is the area we're going to go into, and there's absolutely no thinking behind it at all. I mean, you and I do kind of class data play because we have opinions we want to put out on some of these topics, and we're sometimes complimentary where credit is due, and sometimes we're not, as in this case. So but we are putting out our own opinion. Nobody's paid us, nobody sponsors us, and if that is the case, we will declare that. We will say this segment is sponsored, or whatever. But again, my approach would be, if that was the case, my approach would still be that I want to really put out what my opinion is on that product, solution, technology, platform, or whatever it is. Whereas I think a lot of these kind of channels, they're just really another outlet for the marketing team of that vendor.
I think you need to look at the vendors too, in the sense that they're taking advantage of that, but not really knowing why they're doing it. Well, they think they know why they're doing it. I mean, I always found as an analyst, you sort of spot the ones coming with a marketing proposition that just doesn't stack up, and you think, and they get rather disappointed with you and drop you fairly rapidly when you sort of don't, sorry, we don't really want to write anything about this. But it's just, you spot the really good vendors who want to get the issues out on the table in a broad sense. And I mean, I had one conversation just last week, and really it was so refreshing. And again, on the grounds that we just don't name and sort of, this wasn't a shame. I mean, this company was really good, saying we know that there are areas that our product doesn't meet. Therefore, what we've got to do is find out where people have the big issues that we can meet. You think, okay, so tell me what they are, and now give me the evidence why they do that. And we had a really open conversation. You just think, no, that's great. And you sort of feel comfortable then about doing the work, but quite a lot will come on and, give you the marketing blurb that says absolutely nothing. And when you start asking the difficult, pointy questions, and also like, show me, why did you do this? So you can spread the blame around, but I think, largely this whole idea of influencers, which is spread in from B2B, from B2C, is now so prevalent in our market that it's hard to tell. But I say it might be an echo chamber. They're talking to themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, believe it or not, in the consumer world, on the consumer side, so somebody's reviewing a phone, for example, from Apple or Samsung, whatever, it's actually relatively clear cut whether they're just one of these influencers and shills for that vendor, or they're actually doing a genuine review of that. So it's actually a lot more clear cut in the consumer world, when to know kind of whether this person is is an influencer and therefore a shill is effectively
but again,
for the vendor or not.
Yeah, but a lot of it is about the individual, isn't it? This is about almost vanity. In the sense
personality
that
comes into
if you look in B2C influencers, actually the product becomes almost secondary. It's, if so-and-so does this, then I must do that. It doesn't matter what the product is. And to an extent, we're starting to see some of that in the sort of B2B space, certainly on LinkedIn, where people, go across quite a wide range at very high level. And they're trying to, it's becoming, well, if that person says this, it must be good.
Yeah.
Actually, if you think business leaders and tech leaders are going to fall for that, what planet are you on?
So we kind of, the influencers we said are kind of essentially the shills. There's lots of these kind of definitions that have come up over the last few years. Is I think the media space is being kind of dissected or is diverging. And then the access media is kind of just the people who, will basically put out anything as long as they've got access to you, goodie bags or interviews with your field CTOs or CEOs or whatever it is, essentially. And there's quite a few YouTube channels that are like that. Again, more evidence in the description of the video. And they all seem to be kind of really loudspeakers for the IT vendors, but only essentially, obviously, the ones that effectively sponsor them. And again, if you look at some of them actually on their websites, they have a sponsors page and they list out the actual sponsors that they have. So clearly, they're not going to say anything negative about those particular sponsors. So again, this independence, impartiality, as what, not just those two things for me, Paul, but also putting out your own opinion. Just putting out your own, I disagree with this report. I don't like that product. I reviewed this and it's rubbish, or actually, I really liked it or whatever, and here's why I liked it. There just isn't that. It's just not available. So what's the point of, I mean, there seems to be very blurred, if at all, a line between them and a vendor's marketing team.
Yeah, yes, I couldn't agree more. And what really upsets me as a marketeer, because my background before analysis was very much marketing, was the damage it does to the whole idea of marketing. It becomes this sort of, how to sell snake oil type approach, which is sort of, oh God, and we've been fighting that for years and years and years. And a lot of it, of course, now is down to the fact that everything has to happen so fast and so quick. Nobody's got the patience to build things. And, I know from a technical point of view, you'll have concerns that, people jump in to do things without thinking about the architectural approach or all those sort of issues. Nobody's got time. And that seems to be a bit of a problem. And we get there in the end, but how much money do we waste going down the track, of just jumping in and doing stuff?
Yeah.
How many rockets has Elon Musk got to destroy before he gets it right?
Well, he's got lots of money, that's for sure. But I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, I think, just how many sort of really truly independent kind of media outlets are there really for IT? Probably not that many.
Not that many now. No.
And I mean, a certain outlet recently attended Boomi World, and again, more evidence in the description for this one. And I mean, clearly it was very much arranged with Boomi. It was all kind of organized. They had a whole bunch of guests and whatever coming on and waxing lyrical about, sort of Boomi and all the sort of AI world and AI integration and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I guess you could do that with a very sliver, a very slim line of independence, and just say, I'm just here to report on Boomi World. I'm not going to say anything negative. I'm not going to say anything positive. Anything that comes out, will be out of the mouths of the guests that I have on to interview, the marketing guys, the CEO, who or whoever it is. And I'm just essentially a moderator, fireside chat, question asking sort of moderator really for that. Because otherwise, if you're kind of pushing it, then you're immediately, the shill. You're immediately trying to be an influencer or the shill for that, company. Or you're seen as being somebody who's just the so-called, like I said, access media. You're doing this because it gives you access and it allows you to put out more content on your website or YouTube channel or whatever.
Yeah, I don't even think just doing the moderator piece is particularly useful. If you haven't sort of thought around, what are the pros and cons? Why is this thing that we're talking about? Why is it important? What does it do? Who should be bothered about it?
Yeah.
And all of that is a sort of anybody going to do this? You should ask those questions to yourself first.
Yeah.
Why is this thing important? And who would be interested? And why should they be interested?
Yeah. I mean, this channel is not sponsored. So when I go and talk to vendors, either during the live streams or when I bring on guests onto the channel to talk about, either their solution or a technology in general, as we do in this segment, that's because I'm interested in it, or I want to actually pick somebody's brains who's an expert in that space, or particular companies doing something interesting, and I go, oh, it'd be nice to do an interview with them, for example. And as we'll see in the FinOps report, in the FinOps topic, I will mention somebody where I did actually do that, and it taught me something new. I had no idea this was going on, and it was something new that I actually kind of picked up on last year, and then went on to actually write an article with their help and their assistance in terms of, am I getting what you're saying here right? Is this technology or is this solution that you're doing, or general technology that you're offering a solution within, am I getting it right in my article? So I kind of, made that contact, used that contact to write something about that particular technology, which I had no idea was going on.
But I think I mean, what you said, I think is quite important. It's things that A, we enjoy talking about,
Yeah,
so we're constantly curious and interested about what's going on.
yeah,
And if people find our conversations useful, that's an added bonus.
yeah.
It's not, oh, we better work this out in a way that they're going to find it useful, because we will immediately start to fall into the trap of some of the others.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
I think it works because A, it's not sponsored, and B, we are quite happy to make to give our own opinions, positive or negative. And if people like it and they want to view it more, that's a plus point.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I
That
mean,
way
it's
around. That
yeah,
way around.
exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think kind of being an independent, I think, outlet is really good, and I really value that in terms of what I'm doing, because it's ultimately it's kind of, for my own, sort of um, uh, my own work, really, kind of my own sort of needs to kind of grow and learn and talk to other people, connect with people, go to these conferences, and talk to the vendors and ask them slightly awkward questions and put them on the spot sometimes and so on. And so I think that's kind of really the main reason for me. And yeah, as you said, it does have a really good potential when people like it or people find it useful. That's definitely a bonus, as you said.
I think the last, maybe the last point here is that to anybody watching this and anybody watching any of those sort of channels and that we've been talking about is you always need to ask yourself, where is the person who's making it coming from?
What's the angle? Yeah,
What's the angle? You know,
yeah,
because everybody's got an angle. Our angle is we like to have the conversation. We want to expand our knowledge, and we quite like to change each other's opinions at times. But
yeah,
but that's what's the angle? People don't do that.
yeah. So yeah, just how many truly independent media outlets are out there? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only channel. Who knows?
That's a
um,
scary thought.
that would be a scary thought. That's scaring myself actually just thinking about that. But one final point on that. I did actually have a little bit of good news recently. So a couple of guys I invited on, which were recommended to me, by the way, again by another guest that was on the channel. They were recommended to me to come on the channel to talk about platform engineering. This was kind of when really PE was kind of picking up, quite a lot last year. There's a lot of momentum behind it. It's still going today. But last year was kind of slightly different kind of approach and alien concept and so on. So anyway, I had three guys on, and two of the guys that I had on, shout out to Gotham and Mark, hope you're well, actually continued their conversation together. So they're from completely different companies, but they continued their conversation together after they did the panel discussion with me last year, and since then they've written a book together. So they'd never met each other before, but they've now written a book together, and the book is coming out, and we're going to have them back on to actually do a review of the book on the channel soon as well, which is fantastic. So the book is coming out soon, and we'll probably do a separate thing on that. So yeah, that really made me very happy in that I played a small part in kind of introducing those guys and getting them together to work on a book, and they found lots of synergy in terms of their opinions and what they were doing around platform engineering. So that's a really nice way, kind of a way to kind of tie up that whole thing of what we were talking about in terms of being sort of an independent outlet versus some of these kind of more influencers, Shills and the Access Media. Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to our second topic. McKinsey report, open source technology in the age of GenAI or AI. So this is actually GenAI models that are open source, not open source being generated by GenAI models. That's the distinction that we need to make. I'm not sure the original LinkedIn post actually made that clear, because it was by somebody else that I picked up on. It wasn't by McKinsey themselves, but certainly that's what the McKinsey report is about. So for me, just one slightly cynical point to make on this is I think the open source sort of community has finally managed to make itself important again. It was kind of waning off a little bit there, and then GenAI sort of happened. They were in a panic last year about it. I attended the State of Open Con last year, 2024, SUCon conference in London. And I tell you, you should have seen the panic on people's faces at that conference. They had no idea what GenAI was. They had no idea what their role was within it. Everybody was kind of panicking. Were they going to lose their jobs? Was GenAI going to replace them because of things like the co-pilots and things like that in GitHub and what have you. So yeah, there was a real panic about in the open source communities of whether they were going to be kind of irrelevant really in this sort of GenAI sort of era. But it looks like they've managed to save themselves. I really, I just kind of found it a little bit, slightly pathetic really, that they were kind of in that kind of panic about it. And then every single post that I saw around open source was open source with AI, Kubernetes with with AI, blah 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 with GenAI. Everything that they were doing from then on was around that. So I don't know. I just found that a little bit slightly pathetic, to be honest with you, in regards to that. And then I started seeing the influencers, the so-called influencers in that space, again in the open source space, all talking about again how you do GenAI. Like I said, all of these posts were sort of around doing open source with GenAI. So that's kind of my first impression from what was happening, what's kind of really led us to where we are today, where a lot of the GenAI models that are being released are open source based.
Yeah, I mean, the report was reasonably well put together. I didn't have many problems with the report itself, the numbers of people and who they were talking to. I don't think it said anything that we're going to find particularly earth-shattering about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the one that came out, there was a couple of things for me that came out particularly. The first was that the biggest use of open source was amongst the in the tools. And you go, yeah, almost no shit, Sherlock. I mean, it's because we've had these conversations before that says open source is most effective for developers developing new tools. That's where an awful lot of open source has sort of sprung up from.
Yeah, exactly.
And is used. And it's a great environment, a great ecosystem for getting, new developments and innovations quickly to, into the market. I was going to say to market. I'll come back to that. I think it's but getting them, into being used because of the developers. And it was noticeable every response to the questions that McKinsey were putting out to their audience. The importance declined as you went further along the development life cycle. You got down to inference at the far end,
right?
And the use of open source was much smaller. I mean, it was still fairly significant. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah.
So I think there was an element of open source has a role to play here, guys, up front. But I mean, there was an interesting comment. It was a guy called Vilas S. Dar, president of Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And I haven't had a chance to look up what the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation actually is. But he ended up, the future of AI belongs to ecosystems, not empires. And you just thought, actually, you're going to be seriously, upset and sort of in the future. Because again, as we've talked about in the past, open source is most active in something really new before the empires have actually realized there's a revolution going on.
Yes.
And you get the Empire Strikes Back, and all of a sudden, the bad guys have suddenly bought all the open source, tools and vendors and God knows what. So
And that's
Yes.
happened already because, all of the names that we know, like Mistral, Anthropic, and so on, have all had investments from the hyperscalers.
Yeah. It's with
and OpenAI, of course.
and so there's maybe well, we know we're cynical,
Oh yeah,
old so and so's. Well, I'm old. You're not so old, but
getting there.
getting there. But it's
Yeah.
it's a sort of almost like a natural evolution that
Yes.
that and there's a certain cynicism amongst the or opportunism amongst large scale enterprise, whether that's the hyperscalers or it's Meta. I mean, Meta were one of the worst examples of using open source and then effectively closing it off for its own particular use. And they can see it's great. I've got all these people who are doing stuff without me having to pay them.
Yes.
And I can sit back and wait until I see whether it's going to work and whether it's potential for making money, and then I'll jump in. So I think there's, and I don't think this is any different. And it's the way of the world. And let's not get sort of too starry-eyed about it or too cynical about it. That is just the way of the world. So I think, yes, it's on the same sort of curve as a lot of other technologies are. That in the early days when the big companies either can't see where it's going or can see where it's going but think they'll wait to jump in. That's where we're at with AI, I think. Certainly the tool sets.
Yeah. Like I said, I just found we'll get to the kind of some of the details of the report in a minute, but just that sort of open source community just seemed to be in a panic last year. And then they kind of, try to make themselves as relevant as they can by, pushing out all this stuff. And you can run all your GenAI stuff, all your open source GenAI models on top of open source platforms. And now the CNCF has kind of really waded in as well. Lots of projects that they're supporting and having under their wing are have AI in mind, or they're geared towards sort of AI models and things like that. I mean, my point always remains that GenAI and this kind of more recent GenAI revolution, it's whether you're kind of doing the pre-training or the inference side, GenAI is essentially an HPC workload. It doesn't need to be open source. It doesn't need Kubernetes. It doesn't need any virtualization. It doesn't need anything. You basically run it as close to the bare metal as you can. Obviously, that's not always possible. The likes of OpenAI have used Azure, for example, to do their research on ChatGPT in the past and so on. And that was part of the main investment that Microsoft did back in, I think, 2018.
But they would still use as close to the bare metal even in that environment.
Well, yeah, technically, but I mean, it's not the same as running an operating system and putting the GenAI app on top of it on a Dell server, for example. You're not going to get any closer to that, whether you're a cloud or a hypervisor or Kubernetes or OpenShift or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get any closer to that, in any other shape or form. So, yeah, it's an HPC workload. It doesn't need to be. First of all, it does not need to be open sourced, and we can see that OpenAI is doing very well without open sourcing any of their models. I think they've kind of skirted around the edges of that, and some people have said, "Oh yeah, we should open source it," but not necessarily have actually done that. Now, the others you mentioned, Meta, with Llama and so on, they're doing that because they're all late to the game. They're all playing catch up, and a good way for, if you're late to the game, is open source your model, or at least open source one of the models, hopefully create an ecosystem around it, and then people start using your model and not somebody else's. Now, clearly for Meta, that hasn't worked, and clearly for, again, Google and all the others, it hasn't worked because the majority of users, if you look at some of the charts in terms of usage and subscription and API calls that are being made from AI code and AI agents, is through to OpenAI's platforms, so ChatGPT namely, and so on. But that is, I think, the idea of why we've seen a proliferation of open source Gen AI models, or Gen AI models that are open sourced and available. The other point I want to make, which I think the report doesn't really pick up on a lot, which was unfortunate and a little bit disappointing, is the fact that some of these so-called open source models are not really open source as in the Linux OS open source license type. They're of a different kind. And certainly I think some of the Llama models have been criticized recently. I'll try and pick up some info on this, by the way, which I'm sure I do have somewhere, and include that in the description of the video. So have a look at that. So that's been one of the criticisms, is that people are calling them, Gen AI open source models, but they're not necessarily that. And again, that's been something that some people have actually picked up on, to the point where some people say, if you're going to run the model, run it in your own data center or in your own private cloud or whatever, and don't put it out in a public cloud or use somebody else's tool and things like that. Now, that in itself has its own impact, because not everybody can train their own model. Not everybody can fine-tune their own model as well, which goes back to the report that I actually wrote last year. And I was trying to get that out as quickly as I could. Again, I'll try and include a link in the description of the video to that report, which was about where you're going to run your Gen AI model, essentially. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, one of the things that I've seen, in that this kind of vanity and hypocrisy of, everything has to be open sourced, and we need to, have control over Gen AI models and force people to make them open source. Well, like I said, OpenAI doesn't care about doing that, and they're doing very well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, one of the things that the report intrigued me, and it leaves us sort of questions to be asked, is that the audience that they asked, I mean, there was about 800 or 900 responses that they asked, and there was quite a broad cross section, but they didn't really break down how many of those were out and out technical people, how many, because a CIO can be technical or can be very business oriented, we know that. And to an extent, a lot of these titles get misused anyway. Even CTOs like yourself, I know you're very technical, but you come across some, you think they're more like a CIO than the CTO. And so one of the challenges of all the responses was that if you go into the report, they do these sort of bar charts for each of the sort of questions they asked. And you get the one color is the people who agree with the question, and the other is they disagree with the question.
Yeah.
But there's a bit in the middle that's blank, and and they actually put it's no preference or don't know.
Yeah.
And you think actually it's quite large percentages of that. So and my challenge, again as an analyst, is to come back and say, well, if you're talking about tech leaders say that open source AI models are less costly to deploy than proprietary AI models are, but lag behind them in time to value. Interesting. 60% said has lower cost implementation. And all of a sudden you think, but if you then break that down and say it's the people who are actually running it, or is this the perception of business leaders, the more further up the tree? That report didn't go into this, so you get a slightly misleading, everybody's saying it's 60% more cheaper to run open source models than proprietary models. Okay. And so you're left thinking, I need to dig in further, and I'd love to have seen a breakdown of answers, because as it was, you're wondering what of that 60%, how many of those were either the techies at one end or the business people at the other end of the spectrum. People they'd asked, and it's not clear. But there weren't a lot of really contentious issues. I think it was mostly what you'd expect to see, that at the model building stage, they were a lot of open source. But when the further you got into running them, as you say, on the infrastructure or
Yeah.
using inferencing. Oh, the one that intrigued me was modification, and I'm not quite sure what they meant by modification. There's one set of
Okay.
where the lowest, if you like, acceptance of open source was where people had to do modifications.
Oh, okay. So that might be, so, a model's open source, and then you have to tweak it to kind of make it a bit more proprietary for you, maybe, or something, or specific for your.
So again, maybe that's not particularly earth-shattering, and maybe that's the reason I sort of took the whole report as not being particularly earth-shattering.
Well, yeah, I mean, most people, I guess, or well, I don't know what the percentage. I'm just saying most as a just arbitrary sort of description, but in certain cases or most cases, not everybody knows what the model is doing inside anyway, what the code of the model is doing, because it was written by somebody else. Just like you're inheriting this open source code, right? And you're going to kind of use it internally. So unless you have, 50 data scientists and ML ops engineers and developers, have experience with AI and GenAI, you're just going to compile the model and use it because it's an open sourcely available model, right? And because you want to do GenAI in your business, but you don't really know what the model is essentially doing. And one of the things I think that was mentioned is whether the weights are open of the model, the open weights of the model, which refers to the open weights, kind of refers to the AI model which is being trained with parameters or weights that are made publicly available. So how it was trained, the data sets and things like that. So that allows you to basically, allows users to access, run, modify, and adapt the models independently of the original training code or any proprietary restrictions. So again, that's GenAI is not just a piece of code that you can just take and then you can read the code and then go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and I understand that bit. And it's not that simple. You need the expertise, you need experts who know what the code is doing, who know how a GenAI model and all the techniques. And there's different techniques apart from LLMs. There's different techniques. I was just looking at the chart the other day, which is showing other models, and the person who was posting on it was saying we can't call all of these LLMs because they're not LLMs. The original sort of ChatGPTs are kind of an LLM approach, but there's some of these other newer models are not really LLMs. They're some other kind of LMs. They're large language models, but they're not necessarily large or something like that. Or they're not necessarily just large language models, for example, and so on. So I think there's a lot more depth to kind of, GenAI open source versus just getting some open source that does a particular function. And I think that's the difficulty, even with the report. It depends on which layer the report is asking the question. As you just said, it could be if the report is within the model, it's kind of looking at within the model, then it's not going to ask those external type questions about open source Gen AI models. It's going to be within that space. So it's going to kind of talk within that ecosystem and not look at it from the outside, for example. So it just depends on what really McKinsey's angle was, or their kind of, where did they want to start their reports. Now, I picked up, I wanted to do like a top 5 stats from the report. And yeah, it wasn't kind of remarkable. There was a lot of it was, I don't know, academic, I guess. So, it said widespread use of open source Gen AI models. Yeah, 50% of respondents reported that they are leveraging it. Well, they would, because it's not 100%, it's not 95%, because as I said in my article last year, not everybody's going to want to build their own model. And this goes back to actually what Gartner put out and has been putting out and updating since. Really great chart, by the way, guys. I'll try and include that in the description of the video as well, in terms of whether you do a build or buy when it comes to your model. And I think you and I have spoken in the past and said, not everybody's going to want to build and fine tune and rag their own model, because they're not a tech company. They're a, we sell apples and oranges, right? And I do want to use AI. So how do I do that? Well, I'll just use like a SaaS model instead. So that's why this one said, the respondents, only 50% of the respondents said that they leverage open source technologies for the AI tech stack.
Yeah, one of the ones, the particular stat that sort of took my attention, say that when talking about tech leaders, say that open source AI models are less costly to deploy than proprietary AI models, but lag behind them in time to value. And you look down to has a faster time to value ratio. And it's certainly the biggest negative response, 48% saying it takes longer. But I think that just backs up what what you've just been highlighting, is that an awful lot of organizations out there, want to get the benefits out of this thing. And the quickest way to getting benefits is to use a model that's already been developed for their line of business, with things in mind, where any modifications, any rag, that needs to go on is fairly small to get it to do what they need to do to get the value out of it. Because you can imagine, industry leaders saying, are we going to let our developers spend another year, developing the most fancy models? For something that actually we only need an 80% answer to, and I think that's normal, but to take our own medicine, as it were, that we sort of said, we should be asking where people are coming from, because McKinsey's reason for doing this is to get more consulting revenue.
Well, so
they don't want to give you all the answers. They want to make it so what's the issue here? Oh, well, I'm going to have to ask McKinsey, and that's us being, particularly cynical, but that's it. If you've given this to a university that says, right, do it as a project, I think you'd have got not different answers maybe, but much more detailed breakdown that enabled you to say, okay, in my particular instance, this is the important thing, not that. And that was the problem with this. McKinsey, enough for it to be interesting, but not enough to say, I can now use that without going back to McKinsey to say, well, how do I do something? So if you're being cynical, that's
some of the other stats include things like, sector leadership. So you have, technology, of course, media, telco. 70% of respondents said they're using it. Cost benefits of open source. 60% of respondents indicated that open source GenAI results in lower implementation costs, as you said. Developer valuation of open source, significant. 81% of developers stated that experience with open source AI tools is highly valued in their field. Well, because it's saving you writing a lot of code and going to dodgy websites and downloading code that's going to run some Bitcoin mining in the background or something. That was the whole point of things like DevSecOps. And then the last one I picked up on was growth outlook. Approximately 75% of respondents expect their organizations to increase their use of open source AI technologies over the next few years, signaling strong future momentum for open source in AI. Strong momentum in GenAI in general, not just open source in AI or GenAI, including things like AI SaaS, as I call it, kind of the SaaS side of AI, where you just bring your data and your data sets and drop them into, as we said earlier, an existing model, like a law firm. You're not going to get a law firm's not going to sit there and build their own model and fine tune it and rag it and all that kind of thing. They're just going to say, is there like a Salesforce version?
Not until they don't pick up one of the hallucinations and try and go to court.
And try and go to court and get sued for it and then have to defend themselves.
That's
ironically.
happened.
Yeah. So
Okay. It's
so the like I said, the other area, as we said, is kind of the the licensing concerns, and also not a lot of these are sort of fully open. They're partially open only, and so on. So that's an area of concern. And then, I mean, the findings, I guess, again, kind of, 50% of organizations actively using open source AI. Okay. What else? We talked about the majority growth. And so not a lot really in there that was, as we said, earth shattering. I think you said that. So.
Yeah, I think that was true. But it probably does presage a different conversation you and I need to have around, we're just starting to see, I mean, Gartner just describing GenAI as about to enter the trough of disillusion.
Well, if you read the press, certain parties in the press, they're actually think that's already happening, and CIOs are already disappointed.
But I think, when there's an Economist article I've just read, and I'll put my hand up and say I do like The Economist. It's one of my go-to reads, and which probably makes me a centrist dad with a vengeance, but there we go. But, I think there is growing evidence, and from this report, the fact that the biggest negative response was around time to value for open source, and in terms of AI models, and you have to ask yourself the question, why is that the case? And it does seem to be that enterprises, and again, I had a little bit of a problem with the classifications, the business classifications. They were very broad business classifications, and actually, to use a marketing term, how is Gen AI going to cross the chasm inside enterprises? How's it going to get to mass adoption within enterprises? And we talk about use cases, and I know you're going, well, it's a bit hard to talk about use cases when they haven't got any use cases, but you can define what the use cases need to be for a vertical market. So it's just, I see us having to have this conversation that says, is GenAI in the trough of disillusion, and what's the, and what's the way out for it, and why is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the use cases are very clear cut. It's everything, really, but it's all about how do you implement it, and how do you use it.
But my point will be, if you think it's everything, it's like this idea of having widespread knowledge but not so deep technical understanding. Same sort of issue. If you make it everything, you really will. It'll be a much slower process to get it adopted properly. And we can have a separate conversation. Maybe you need another channel, which is the go-to-market channel.
GenAI go-to-market channel.
Well, just how do you take stuff to market? How do you take new stuff to market?
That's always a tricky one, isn't it?
It is a tricky one,
and actually, GenAI is really suffering from that.
It is. It's suffering from the fact that it's I can do everything, and to which most businesses would go, I'm not really bothered about you doing it. I want you to do this.
Yeah, no. I mean, don't get me wrong. The use cases are that it can do everything. Now, how do you then go about implementing at least one of those things?
Correct.
Is a completely different ballgame.
What are the most important ones to start with?
Yes. So I mean, I think you could probably, and GenAI sort of augmentation has probably answered that question to a degree. So we've seen things like, Microsoft Copilot come into a lot of their tools, for example, so Teams and Word and PowerPoint and whatever. It's now augmented, and AI or GenAI augmentation is one of the sort of levels or layers of kind of how GenAI proliferates or comes in. So I think there are low-hanging fruits, and augmentation is, I think, certainly one of those. So we've kind of seen one of those use cases already, the augmentation use case of augmenting existing tools and systems, right? I mean, a great one that I was thinking about a long time ago, and I noticed somebody's actually done it now, is the putting the putting some putting a GenAI model as an interface to something that is normally only the domain of experts in that space. And now you can query that system, technology, data, whatever it is, using natural language. You don't need to be a domain expert in that technology, in that platform, or on that data type in order to actually be able to query it and get results out of it. Now you can do it with a GenAI model and just write in natural language, an NLP. So I think there is some very low hanging fruits, but yeah, you're right. There's AI use cases are everywhere, but it depends on how you're going to implement them. And I think, like I said, augmentation is probably the easiest one that's come in already.
I must admit, and not to derail and take this particular section somewhere else, it's probably something we need to come back to, but I don't see augmentation as being a particularly effective use case per se, other than for the people who are trying to develop the models. I'm much more into, it's not really going to take off until business starts to show that it's using it in anger and getting productivity improvements as a result. So I mean, augmentation's great, but it's got to then help businesses develop. Because at the moment, the anecdotal evidence is that a lot of business leaders, as opposed to tech leaders, are going, I can't quite work out how it's going to deliver me, how it's going to work for me in my business. And we're sort of there, and that's my point. So with yes, you can make the tools better. You can have use cases that improve the ability to make the models more effective, make the development of the models easier, all those sort of things. Yeah, absolutely, make them run better. But until business suddenly says, I'm now going to use it to do this, again, we're talking to ourselves. This is a very technical discussion amongst ourselves, saying, "Hey, haven't we got a great tool?" And to the classic response, it's got to be, "Don't tell me what you've built. Tell me why you've built it to make my life easier." And my life, and that's at the business level. And until we do that, this won't cross the chasm. And I'm sorry, I'm now getting you're getting into one of my rants. So
no, I agree. Yeah, no, I agree. I think there is, we can see the use cases, we can see how some of the low-hanging fruits are, but the difficulty now is, you're right, in terms of how we're going to actually implement it to do this thing for us. And where some of those use cases might be generic enough so that you can actually produce like a universal product that does those things, like I don't know, something that to do with onboarding in HR, for example. Others are actually very proprietary to that particular business, and each business is different from the next as well. So you could say chatbots is again one of those low-hanging fruits, but then other stuff that's is more proprietary to a particular business, and you really need to fine-tune the model to that particular business process that you're doing, that you want to automate with AI.
But again, you've got I always say there's an 80-20 rule when it comes to business processes. 80% of businesses use what should be a very standard process, and 20% is your unique differentiator in the way you do those particular processes and what you get out of them. And therefore, there is more than enough ability to say, in any business process workflow, I can have some standard ones that run right across businesses, and you have to tailor 20%. Otherwise, you're going to go, I have to tailor. I don't get that standard model. Take even as simple as things as like, you know, when is something in and out of stock, and the answer is, there's a physical answer, but to a finance guy, it's a different point in time than it is to the guy in the warehouse who knows exactly when it's out of stock.
Yeah.
The other guy does it until he gets paid.
Yeah.
It's one of those. The process for moving the stock is the same. So you can automate that. You really ought to be able to automate that, and you give a different view in on it. And it doesn't matter whether you are a clothes retailer, a food retailer, or a food manufacturer, or a chemicals company. Those processes are the same. The views you have into them give you particular views, and there might be some level of, and there are use cases out there. I mean, if you ever want to go and look at the Zara story, fascinating use case about how they changed the process in supply chain. Really interesting story. So I'm sorry. I mean, I'm drifting away from the sort of technology speak.
No, that's okay. I mean, this is.
But that's the problem. I think the problem that Gen AI in particular and AI in general is, or not so much. No, Gen AI in particular has got is it hasn't worked out how to get the enterprise, how to deliver something to the enterprise. We're still going, hey, I've got this really great thing. It does this, 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 and this. And you listen to the hyperscalers themselves talking about Gen AI, and then listen to an enterprise leader talking about Gen AI, and you're at the complete end of the spectrum. There are people, even Mark Andreessen the other day said, don't give up on Gen AI. Keep the faith, guys. It's going to work. It's going to save us all.
Yeah.
And you're going, yeah, but that doesn't get it implemented.
That's still still got to do the implementation.
Microsoft get up on the stage and go, hey, Gen AI is the way forward. We know, but just anyway, sorry. End of soapbox from me.
End of the soapbox rant. Yeah, no problem. I think I agree largely with what you're saying. So it depends. You mentioned the word level, and I think that's important to keep in terms of at which level we're looking to tackle this. Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Third topic is State of FinOps Report 2025 by the FinOps Foundation. This is their 5th annual report produced by the FinOps Foundation. I found it quite interesting. I mean, FinOps is kind of obviously a major topic in terms of cloud economics, as I call it. By the way, I've written an article on cloud economics, guys, which kind of includes FinOps as one of the parts, but it's not the only one, as we've found out. And as I said earlier, in this episode of Cloud State of Play, at the Open Source Summit last year that I attended. More information on that as well coming up. More videos will be in interviews as well on that, by the way, on the channel, depending on when you're watching this. So I was there to moderate a talk completely disassociated with FinOps, but I found that actually there's a lot more to this sort of cloud economic space than FinOps. But let's just focus kind of on the report a little bit first, Paul. And maybe I'll come back with some of the comments. What was kind of any highlights for you? What did you pick up on?
Well, picked up on the fact that FinOps appears to be moving beyond just managing the sort of cloud cost arena and moving into what they're calling FinOps Plus, was it, I think? So they're looking at data center, they're looking at, a much
Cloud Plus, I think.
Cloud Plus, that's right.
Plus, yeah.
Cloud Plus. So they were looking at a much broader set of, which I think is, they got to do. I think if you're just, focused, so that was fine. I found I'm looking at the sort of FinOps framework too, and you can't say there's anything wrong with it, but it's almost like you can, they're saying you can pick and choose what you want from the list for where to start. And I was just worried that, we've had the conversation before about a number of areas that unless you've got the framework set in your mind and you know why you're starting here, and you will go and use all the other bits, it will be suboptimal. And I just felt they were a little too loose with, oh, it's not prescriptive. This is, it's a set of tools, a set of things that you should be doing. And it's almost like, you can just imagine teams go, oh, well, I'm going to start with, what are they going to call it? All the, cloud sustainability or the licensing and SaaS rate optimization work. I'm going to start there and then work out, and you think it's so, the implications around cost and benefit in cloud are so interwoven that if you take two, and I think this is where FinOps has had a problem, it's taken too siloed a view of what's going on.
Yeah. So they said about the era of cloud plus in FinOps. So it says FinOps is as important as ever for delivering value in cloud. Not surprising, really. Blowing your own trumpet. Other technology investments with the majority of practices beginning to manage SaaS spend. Okay, nearly half managing licensing. Some FinOps practices have started to apply their capabilities to private cloud and data center scopes of spending in a sort of of spending in a cloud plus approach to FinOps. Good luck with trying to circle all of the costs in your data center. That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you. I love the fact that they've got, allied personas, ITFM, which I presume is IT finance management, ITAM, IT asset management, and ITSM, IT service management. Again, corralling all that lot is going to be an interesting challenge.
Good luck. Yeah, exactly.
But nonetheless, you've got to bring them in, because if you want to get an accurate view of your costs, you're going to have to, but it is you're biting off a very large piece of work there.
Yeah, so I'll come to the highlights in a minute, but my beef at the moment is, and I could be completely wrong, this could already be solutioned somewhere, is when you're doing FinOps. FinOps is a framework, right? So it's a much kind of larger type of activity. And I've been on the FinOps X events. I think our FinOps Foundation events, and the type of people that you get on there, and they're all from the finance sector. We've got like 10 people on FinOps. I'm the director of, or the FinOps director for Barclays, and all that kind of type of approach. And when you have an army of people to throw at it, I'm sure you can make FinOps work. But when you're an SME company, it's very hard to kind of apply this type of framework, bring in the types of tools that FinOps recommends, and so on. And hence why I think there has been an opening. They really, I think FinOps Foundation hasn't got a clue what's happening underneath them, what's below the kind of the FinOps layer. And under the FinOps layer are things like what I would call cloud cost management or optimization. So that's where you're focusing your cost savings on a particular area of your cloud. So for example, open cost from the CNCF focuses on purely, the Kubernetes space, or like, which is developed by KubeCost, by the way, which is now part of IBM. They were acquired last year by IBM. And KubeCost essentially is focusing on your Kubernetes clusters. It doesn't care about your virtual machines, doesn't care about any external data or storage or API gateways or anything that's outside of that Kubernetes cluster. It just looks at the resources for your Kubernetes cluster and tries to make savings for you there. So that's very kind of laser focused in particular areas. And that's what I would call a cloud cost management or optimization layer. Now, a third layer that I found, and by the way, this is all in my article that I wrote as well. So if you kind of want more details, I'll include the link for the article in the description. A third layer, which is what I found last year at the Open Source Summit, was profiling. So profiling is actually looking at how you develop the application and whether your code and your development of where the application is using, whether they're cloud resources or any of the other type of resources, is actually optimized. So before you've even released your application, profiling helps you to optimize your code. Now, that's not a direct cost saving, but purely by the result of that, the byproduct of that, because you're doing all this optimization of your code, you're using less resources of whatever the platform happens to be, your data center, virtualization platform, public cloud, it doesn't really matter. So profiling is helping you to do that. And the flip side of that coin is application performance monitoring, APM, which you and I obviously have spoken about in the past and we know very well. So, the likes of Turbonomic and App Dynamics and people like that have all done APM for a long time. And that's actually looking at workloads after they're deployed. So are they utilizing their environment and are they configured and built and deployed in a cost optimized way? So these other layers, cloud cost management / optimization, some people call it management, some people call it optimization. I think it's the same layer. And then the profiling layer are two other layers which FinOps has no idea about. Absolutely zero idea. Now they might say, oh yeah, our tools do that, or we can integrate with those areas and we can pipe it all up to MoogSoft, which is kind of your AI ops tool, if that's what you have, or Dynatrace or Datadog or whatever. Yeah, that's fine. I don't want 10 freaking screens to be looking at when it comes to my cloud cost management. I want I want one interface, one Slack message. That's what I want to have. I don't want like 10 different tools to be doing it. One FinOps tool, one cloud cost optimization tool, one profiling tool, and so on. I want everything to be under one roof, at least reporting and integrating into my, observability platform, maybe.
Yeah, observability into all the various component parts, not so much of an application, but of how costs are built up in this sort of world. Can you do it bottom up effectively without being there's a top down element too, isn't there? Which, has come out, which just made me weep actually when I read it again, which sort of basically said there's still not enough, collaboration, if you like, or buy-in from senior, execs, around, what are, and it probably doesn't filter down into FinOps, is, what's our strategy? What are we trying to do? What are the business metrics that are important to us? And how do these play into that? Because you talked about the one, I love the one about, the sort of optimization of the code.
Yeah.
And you think, well, why have we got a problem down there? We've got a problem down there because we expect people to rattle code out very, very rapidly. And B, we've got infrastructure now that isn't too upset when it's not particularly efficient, in terms of latency and sort of raw performance. From a cost perspective, somewhat different. I mean, if you go to an AWS or Azure or GCP with applications that are made up of sort of various services that are not efficiently written, it could cost you a lot of money in terms of the way you're paying your bills. But again, that may not be a particular issue for you, is if the benefit you're getting from those is so great, your return on investment is wonderful, that it costs more money to try and make those really efficient than the benefit you're getting out at the far end. And I think I've used the analogy before of the big European Swiss bank, where the cloud guys were getting hammered by the finance guys because their cloud bills kept going through the roof. They were spending more than they used to on analytics than when they weren't in the cloud. To which the answer should have been, and to the frustration of the cloud person we were talking to, the finance people didn't seem to get, with the fact that actually now the amount of analysis they can do gives them opportunities in different marketplaces, and they hadn't even he hadn't done the work to find out what the real return on investment was. But it's it it is a huge area.
Mm.
I think I was glad to see that it was trying to cover the broadest sense. But as you say, trying to corral that lot's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just like I said, I see FinOps as a framework approach, and just by nature, by just saying that, and kind of how I think the FinOps Foundation approaches it, it's quite a cumbersome and bulky thing to implement, because you're having to bring in lots of different people, finance and product owners and whatever else you're gonna whatever they have in their framework to kind of bring in, and that's why I think there's been this kind of splintering of that, because people have seen, well, nobody's looking at Kubernetes clusters, so we're going to produce something called KubeCost. We're going to open source it as OpenCost to the CNCF, and oh look, we're actually important enough for IBM to acquire us. So clearly, this is something, we're doing something right here by focusing purely on Kubernetes clusters and not caring about the rest of the cloud environment. Let FinOps deal with that. We'll just deal with this, with optimizing the Kubernetes clusters, that you're running in whichever cloud. And again, same thing in terms of the application layer with this profiling in APM. Shout out, by the way, to Frederick Branchik from Polar Signals for bringing me into the light to actually see, to talk about and realize that profiling is a thing as well. So he actually helped me to get to grips with kind of how profiling works and everything else. I have done an interview with Frederick from Polar Signals, so we will be releasing that on the channel soon, if it's not out already, depending on when you're actually watching this. But just point to make on that is that if you are going to do FinOps, and be prepared to kind of give it a lot of focus, and literally almost assign somebody full time to be kind of your FinOps guy, your FinOps lead, if you like, or have a small team, or maybe be part of the CCOE sort of group that you have, and so on. So I think that's kind of needs to be formalized in that way, and for the people who are actually doing the FinOps practice, obviously they need to be certified and so on, and that's all fine. But like I said, it is a framework approach. It's a much larger investment and commitment to do FinOps than bringing in something like KubeCost or OpenCost and dropping it, or even Polar Signals tool and just dropping it on these particular areas and saying, okay, look, we can save costs here and we can save costs here.
I've often said about DevOps that it's capital DEV and a very small OPS. Here, it's very much definitely a capital FIN and a very small OPS.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the danger is you just create another silo. It's the things.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I think that's what we're seeing. I think with these other areas, and unfortunately, the FinOps Foundation just seems to be completely oblivious to all the stuff that's happening underneath it, and and if it's not. If it doesn't do, and again, like I said, I could be wrong, audience, please let me know if you know this already. If it does integrate with other tools like AI ops tools, or your observability tools, your traditional observability tools, and so on, then that's great. Okay, that's fine. It's actually reporting to something. But if it's not doing that, and it's just saying, no, I just do FinOps, this interface or these tools from these third parties that we recommend as part of the foundation, just do FinOps. Right, and I know that there are tools like that, but I've not dug into kind of deeper into, well, how do they integrate? The first thing whenever I get kind of somebody says, oh yeah, you can see everything on this monitor, on this UI, and I say, okay, how does that integrate with something else? That's my first question, always. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that aspect of it, needs to be a lot more streamlined than it is. But let's pick up on just some of the highlights from the report. So it said this year's report actually included larger enterprise organizations for a change. So with 31% of them currently spending more than $50 million a year in public cloud. 20% of them spending more than $100 million a year on public cloud, and over 20 of them, 20 organizations, spending more than $1 billion a year. They definitely need all three layers of cloud economics, I think, to be applied.
I think you ought to include that in your rants against repatriation.
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah, repatriation, cloud repatriation. What cloud repatriation?
Yeah, with the cost. Yeah. So
yeah. Okay, so workload optimization and waste reduction are clear current top priority for practitioners, FinOps practitioners. Future priorities over the next 12 months include workload optimization, drops a significant 21% to second, okay, while implementing governance and policy at scale becomes top priority. Fair enough. I think, yeah, maybe it has been a little bit lopsided in that we're kind of doing FinOps, as I said, with that governance, which is what I said about the CCOE, right?
Yeah.
Bringing that practice under our sort of general strategy and policies in AI, in cloud, right? Highest changes in priorities are managing AI ML spend. There we go. There's AI. That's up 4 places. Managing costs beyond public cloud, up 5 places. And getting to unit economics, up 5 places. Okay, that's interesting. So a lot of kind of changes in terms of the prioritization of what you do. I mean, AI ML again being in there, I'm not really surprised. Yes, we do need to do that at some point. So you might as well start doing that now, and probably because people are still in the POC and piloting mode when it comes to GenAI.
Yeah, I was interested by the sort of focus on SaaS optimization of in SaaS environments. I was like, well, surely that was part of the original cloud anyway, wasn't it? And this idea that you could ignore the SaaS element of it was sort of strange, given that probably when you look at I suppose it's because SaaS has been applied most to medium-sized enterprises and smaller enterprises rather than the largest ones. So maybe that's why it slipped under the radar. But I just looked at it and thought, really? Are you only just thinking about that one now?
Yeah, and what I mean, SaaS should surely be and I could be again completely wrong. Dear audience, let me know if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to eat my words. But SaaS, I would have thought, as a subscription model, or as which is essentially what most of them do, should be the most clear-cut cost that you have, that you can see, that's visible. It's £20 a month or whatever it is. Then it's £20 a month. Now you can say whether you want to spend that £20 a month. Is it worth spending that, or are we enabling the right aspects of that SaaS, and that we're spending £20 a month on it? I don't know. That's a different question, though, right?
Yeah, but the challenge, I think, probably maybe why it's bubbled to the surface. You were talking about £20 a month, is that a lot more of it is outcome based, and sort of the sort of splitting up. You're buying SaaS services based on the business outcomes, or rather than saying, because in the early days it was just a way of switching the model from one-time license and support to a subscription model. But I think it's moved beyond that for a lot of SaaS companies in terms of it's almost functions as a service rather than SaaS, but it's outputs and outcomes that they're worried about. So that will make it slightly more complicated. So in defense of them saying, oh, we better look at SaaS now. But the whole idea that they didn't include SaaS in their original sort of focus seemed bizarre.
So tell me on this one. This is something I picked up, and I could be reading this wrong, but it says in the free-form responses, it said organizational alignment, i.e. leadership buy-in, has reduced from last year by 9%. And then it says, which is a positive indicator.
Yes.
How can your leadership not caring about FinOps anymore, or saying, actually, we don't need to worry about FinOps for this year, being a positive indicator?
I read that and took exactly the same reaction as you. I don't get that. In fact,
That's bizarre.
that was the one that really made me weep, in the sense that, IT has been trying for
These
as
viewers,
long as it's been
the audience,
around.
you don't want to see Paul crying. But no, seriously, I mean, and it says, but it still remains the most needed path to achieve priorities.
Yes, and it's
Huh?
a pox on your organization, really, in the sense that we've been trying for as long as IT's been around to align business and IT, the business leaders and the IT leaders. And every time we think we're just about crossing the bridge and getting everybody to meet up in the middle and shake hands,
Right.
somebody knocks a hole in the flipping bridge and everybody falls in again.
Right. So, okay, next one.
But I agree with you. It was just
that sentence doesn't make any sense at all. I do not get that.
No.
Next one, it said investment and tooling had a large increase. So how can you have in a 20% increase? So how can you have investment increasing having a large increase of 20% when you've just said your leaders are saying don't worry about FinOps for 2025? I don't get that. But the tooling side investment and tooling has increased by 20%. So and it says, okay, so for example, this time the responses were around upskilling, tooling, specific call outs for automation. This whole sentence doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
And to me, that one smacked of, great, management's not looking, we can go and spend more money on the tooling.
Yeah, which defeats the whole object of
exactly. The whole, yeah.
Okay. Okay. What else? I mean, there's a ton of information on there, and that's fine. It's great to actually see that, but I think just some of it doesn't really make a great deal of sense.
It's a complex area, but it's something that needs to be done. But whether you put it all into one framework or whether you give different responsibilities to different, back to your efficiency of the code.
Yes.
Don't make finance people responsible for that.
Yeah. Don't even make developers responsible for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Let alone ops. But I think I know what I'm going to ask the FinOps Foundation next time I see them at the show. I've got the questions in my head now. So
can I be there and watch?
I'll record it. I'll do it as a live stream. I'll just rock up to them and say, hey, stick a microphone in their face. Okay, so what else did we pick up here? So yeah, sustainability remains flat. I'm not surprised. I think we're seeing that across the board because nobody cares anymore. Okay, one of the other things that they talked about or mentioned is something called focus. Now, focus is a technical specification, according to them, that normalizes cost and usage billing data across cloud vendors. So it's kind of their aggregator, I guess, of sort of costs, open cost and usage specification. That's what it stands for. FinOps, open cost and usage specification. That's what focus stands for. So it's an open specification that defines clear requirements for billing data generators to produce consistent cost and usage data stats. Tell that to the hyperscalers, first of all.
Yes. Yes.
So that's one of the first things. So nobody's adopted it as far as I know. And then the other thing is that there has been criticism around presumably this, but what people generally call cloud units, I think. And that, and some people have gone as far as saying FinOps is flawed and has failed in terms of measuring the cost of cloud computing. But again, even in those quarters, we can't see a good explanation being offered as to why it has failed. Yeah. They're just saying that cloud units is not a good way to measure it. Okay, so what's your alternative? Why aren't you putting this out to the FinOps Foundation? Right? I mean, shouting about it, screaming about it that it's not working, or it doesn't give you the full picture when it comes to these, cloud units is one thing. But then you've got to you want to go and do something about that, right?
Yeah, I'm reaching for my notepad because there were a couple of things I read, and the units was one, and I put, if they are only using a simple cost saving for units, then shooting.
Yeah.
It's never going to be the low, and they were talking about it's never going to be the low cost option.
Yeah.
That was, the pushback on FinOps. Why is FinOps not working?
Yeah.
Really? Always? If you're if you're starting to use too simple a unit like a cloud unit, you're going to run into those sort of anomalies where you think, oh, it's not, cloud's not working, and you go, oh, for goodness sake.
I think the problem here is that one side is the FinOps Foundation is unable to respond because they don't have a clue how things are costed in the public cloud, and on the other side, the hyperscalers are unwilling to respond, because if they do respond or become part of the FinOps Foundation, all their secrets are revealed in terms of how they do their costs. And the FinOps Foundation was going to say, well, I need disclosure. I need to know this so I can recalculate my cloud units or whatever unit of measurement I'm going to use, and so on. So one side is unable because they don't have the truth. They don't have all the formulas and cost tables and whatever that are used by the hyperscalers, or indeed really anybody. And on the other side, they're unwilling to respond.
And in that, you've just summarized in one sentence the whole state of the economy, if you like. We talk about in marketing sort of theory.
I'm not that good.
But they talk about perfect markets and imperfect markets. And the reality is, unless you have perfect knowledge, you can't have a perfect market. And you're never going to have perfect knowledge because of what you just said.
Yeah.
It's always going to be imperfect. Therefore, you're going to find different ways of doing this. And if that's trying to simplify it, forget it.
Yeah, but I mean, there is always, measurements or ways that you can use to be as accurate as you can. And, like I said, the pushback, the criticism of the FinOps Foundation is that they're not doing that. It's flawed and it's failing. Is the wording that I'm picking up on that. Again, I've got evidence for all of this. I'm not just talking for myself or attacking the FinOps Foundation. This is what other people are saying, right? And I'm merely commenting on that, and then looking at the way that they approach things. Like I said, my biggest gripes are they aware of things like cloud cost optimization and management as a layer below them? Does any of this stuff account for it? Do any of the tools that they recommend, any of the framework approaches they have account for stuff like that? Or is it just their golden list of third-party tools that they recommend from Flexera and various other sort of vendors in that space? And they think, that is FinOps. Okay, these tools are doing FinOps. These other ones, KubeCost and OpenCost and whatever, I have no idea what these do. We're going to ignore them. Same thing for that third layer, the profiling and APM layer. Again, is that included in this kind of report, in their focus approach, their focus, specification, and so on? Again, I have no idea. But these would be all the types of questions that I will be asking them, I think.
They talk about workload optimization in the framework, but whether that's the correct way of doing it, God only knows.
What is that? Yeah, and how are they doing it?
How are they doing it? All those, but again, trying to make one of these frameworks fit all the bits and pieces that are out there is going to be a big job in its own right.
I'd be just happy if they acknowledge these things and say, yes, we need to work on our cloud units. Yes, there is this thing called profiling, and it kind of byproducts. And the byproduct of it is a cost saving. So we really should look at that as well. And that's on our roadmap. I should jump on the next FinOps X call and put those questions out. I think that's what I'm going to do, and record that. If I don't see them at the show, I'll send you the link. You can join me on the call. Because they do allow the audience to ask questions.
I think we've probably murdered this one to the extent.
Well, I mean, it's otherwise you see it's it's a Deutsche Bank, it's a Schroders call, a Barclays call, an HSBC call, and those guys that get on. Yeah, you've got like 10 people doing FinOps, and you've got a FinOps practice lead or something, and they come on and say, yeah, after my 2-hour lunch with Flexera or whoever, now I can report this to the FinOps X call, and that's fine.
And again, you need to,
but they're not asking the right questions here. Yeah, nobody's asking the right questions.
Why? There's a big why. If you're talking to the guys at one of the big banks and they're going, oh, we've got 10 people doing FinOps. To what end? Why? Why have you got them doing that? That's what I want to get to. Anyway.
Yeah. But anyway, so the report is there, guys. Lots more information. Actually, both reports, the McKinsey one and the FinOps Foundation reports, are actually quite extensive. Hopefully, we've kind of given you a rounded view, slightly cynical maybe view of both. But there's lots of stats that you can pick up on, and some useful information, I think, as well. At least to kind of see the trends and where things are going kind of in the future. I guess that's probably the main thing that you could get out of it. I don't think the numbers are really hugely important unless you're standing up and presenting, or you want to do FinOps, or use GenAI in your in your organization. Maybe then the figures will come in handy for that. But yeah, a lot more, like I said, evidence around all of this available. So I will be making that available in the description of the video. Okay, I think, Paul, we're there. Otherwise, we're going to go on forever. As much as I love hearing your dulcet tones, I think I need to give you a break so you can rest your
audience might not agree and going, well, would you just
Can you just not summarize that in 15 minutes, Richard? Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate all your input and insights as always. It's been a fun one to do this month. All the links to Paul and what he gets up to when he's not on the Cloud Therapist channel, and when he's not on holiday. I don't have any postcards or pictures, I think, of you, Paul, in your shorts or something on a beach somewhere. What's your favorite drink? A pina colada or mojito? What would be?
No, I'm a gin and tonic man.
Gin and tonic, right? There we go, guys. If you want to thank Paul, then it's a G&T. But yeah, all the links for Paul and everybody will be in the description of the video. Please contribute with your own comments, likes, and shares as well. Please do that. I would love to hear from you in terms of what you guys think about all these topics that we cover. I'm hearing from YouTube statistics that most of you are not subscribers to this channel. Very naughty. I'd love for you guys to be able to actually subscribe, because I do try and put out content on a regular basis. Maybe even comment on the type of stuff that you wanted to hear. Certainly, Paul and I are open to topics in the future, maybe reports and articles that you've picked up on that you might find us useful to cover. Please let us know. That would be useful. But really appreciate you to support the channel by subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, please do consider doing that. That would be very useful for me. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you guys all for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it.